Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inconvenient Intelligence. As you all know, I'm Brian Fuller, your host of our podcast. Today, joining me and co-hosting is our special guest, Mr. Mike Lyden. Thank you all for tuning in. And Mike, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me here today. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
We're honored to have you.
Yeah, to come back to my alma mater and chat with the current generation of folks making the program, what it is. So Mike Lyden, I'm a 2007 graduate of Mercyhurst, the graduate school, the second ever graduate class coming out, which is pretty cool. We joked about it being the class of 007. It was 2007 as we rolled
So you
out.
set you're a pathfinder.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
blazed the
we
path
were
for
early.
today's grad students.
Back when it was the Mercyhurst College Institute of Intelligence Studies.
Oh,
We've
wow.
gone through some name changes, and Surat had just begun, around that time, working on some intelligence community projects during the summer.
Sure.
We had like 2 teams going, so it was a much smaller
Wow.
scale than kind of what we've got
Two
now.
teams to what we are now.
Yeah, right. I think
Oh
we
my
had
gosh.
my group, the team I led, had like 12 students. The other one was smaller with 6.
Yeah.
So like 18-ish for the summer.
And we're at 170.
Yeah,
right
right.
now.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome
Well,
to
thank
see
you
that
for
organic
setting
growth.
the.
Yeah.
Thank you for blazing that trail and
Yeah.
being part of it.
So I came to Mercyhurst from a career in social work.
Oh.
That's where I began. Met some of the founders of the program at a barbecue randomly, and learned about intelligence for the first time. Having grown up outside the Beltway, not part of a military family, I didn't know intelligence analysis, intelligence in general was a thing, right? But I was always a bit of a geopolitical junkie. And so this kind of made sense. It's a cool way to make a career path change.
I like how you said that, geopolitical junkie.
Yeah, a little bit. From worked on a intelligence community project through Surat, ended up getting hired by that organization.
Oh, very nice.
Which is awesome. Which I think is what we kind
It's the way it's supposed to
want
work.
this to work out, right? Yeah.
I'm glad it worked out that way.
And started there as soon as we graduated. Moved down to DC. Ended up spending the first few years of my career in and out of DC and a fair amount of time in Eastern Europe and the Baltics, doing science and technology related intelligence. A little bit different than where I ended up.
The Baltics were a little volatile.
They were a little bit
then.
Too. Yeah. Then got lured into the lighter dark side, depending on your perspective. I joined the counterintelligence organization, which I know
Counterintel is amazing.
I love it.
I didn't until you're in it, you don't know what it really is.
And it's a smaller, more insular community, but I really do enjoy it. Worked with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which stands out as one of the only 3 organizations in the government that are both counterintelligence and law enforcement in one organization. So it's FBI, NCIS of NCIS TV show fame, and OSI.
Right.
We don't have a TV show at OSI, but we do have the Men in Black as the origin story, which is cool. So I think that trumps 60-minute drama.
That's why they're dressed much nicer than
the Air Force. You got to put on your
the Air Force. They have all the nice things.
Ended up as the senior intelligence officer for the organization. So I was running counterintelligence, cybersecurity analysis, those sorts of things for the organization. Left OSI to go work in private sector cybersecurity for a couple of years as a cyber threat intel vice president. From there, I went back into national security, but stayed private sector, where I am now at Draper. We are a research and development lab that works primarily for the government.
Draper Labs.
Yep, and I am their senior intelligence officer.
That's got to be interesting.
It's great. We do amazing things at Draper, and it's my job to help keep what we do safe from adversarial subversion, exploitation, and sabotage.
Well, that leads to why we have you here today.
Yeah, that's the next step.
Because we'd like to talk about cybersecurity and intel and where the gaps are in intelligence. Yeah. We've created something here that we've seen a need for and actually have had a request from out in the private sector is cyber threat hunters. I coined that. I copyrighted it. I own it. But cyber threat hunters, right? And I think you're in a prime position to talk on this topic and really address where the gap is and where the bridge is being built to bring in what cyber threat hunting really is in cybersecurity, because everybody thinks cybersecurity, those are your network defenders. Those are the guys that come in after something happens. So what's your take on this?
I love the phrase. At OSI, we were also adamant that we did cyber threat pursuit, is the term that we called it, the same concept. We were not a cybersecurity, we're not net defenders. It was cyber threat pursuit, right? Which is blending
I like that.
cyber threat intelligence with some of the offensive capabilities that a Title 50 organization has in the U.S. government. And so we always had trouble at both at the time at OSI, but also my time at as a cyber threat intel person, as a senior leader, finding early career individuals who could come in and slot into those spots immediately.
So you're talking someone comes work for you.
Really hard to recruit that person.
Is smarter than those that you're pursuing.
Yeah. And you want to find somebody in their early career to build out a team, right? You want some career growth. Maybe a large organization can't have all senior folks. But traditionally, people in cyber threat intel are mid-career. They've had a section of a career as an intel guy or lady and switched over to cyber and learned, or cyber and switched and had time learning both of those things. The cadre of early career professionals is small. And so it really struck me then that, wow, I took hundreds of resumes for an application to find a person who had sort of that blend of skills I needed.
And there's the inconvenient intelligence right now.
Really hard.
Right now, this is an up and coming field with a high demand, and you just can't take someone that knows how to turn on a computer or can spell cybersecurity and put them in a position to do what you're talking about. That's the inconvenient intelligence side of it. But on the other side, the inconvenient intelligence is if you do have those skills, you're going to get that job ahead of those that maybe just know intel or just know cybersecurity.
Yeah. So I was forced to hire somebody who was more of a keyboard warrior because I could teach the intel side. I couldn't teach the keyboard warrior half of it, right? I knew I do basic net flow analysis. I watched people do it long enough. But that's not my
It's more than just coding on Python.
Yeah, yeah. And as somebody who spent, the last 15 years as sort of a leader of analysts, your skills atrophy. It is, especially in something that's as cutting edge as anything cyber related or digital. I needed to have people who had that skill, but as your team grows, I can't teach everybody how to be an analyst, right? I'd do them a disservice.
So if I'm sitting there and you're in an executive role, if I'm sitting there right now at a company and I'm the executive, or I'm sitting as a director of an agency in the government, why do I need someone who's going to pursue or hunt for the threats? Why do I need that? What is that giving me? Why should I be thinking that's the person I need to hire?
So I think we need to peel back the part of intelligence that's about forecasting. And if you're going to invest into your cybersecurity infrastructure, which hopefully, everyone is doing, but they're not, you have to do so wisely, right? You have limited resources. You have both limited financial resources.
I like what you said there too, by the way. You got to do it wisely.
You do. And you have that finite, and you have a finite amount of resources. You have to somehow distribute this out. And one of the ways you do that, right, is an intelligence-led process. And it doesn't take a huge apparatus to guide this, right? You need to have some group of folks in your organization who can look at what are the threat actors doing, where are they evolving, how their TTPs changing, to make sure that you set up all of your net defense, right, in a way that matches what the actual threat is today,
that's a good way of putting it. You're now talking about the proactive approach to cybersecurity, which is that hunting or that understanding before the attack happens, where I think you were ahead of your time in understanding that, because a lot of what everybody's doing is reactive, and it can cost companies millions and millions and millions of dollars, as opposed to maybe hiring somebody with the skill set on a salary with some benefits that's not going to cost you millions of dollars.
And if you are unfortunate enough to have a serious cyber event with exfil or whatever, understanding the breadth of the damage without the context of who the actor is and what their actual TTPs normally are and what do they target and how do they just generally behave, you're going to spend a lot of time, initially in that first 12 hours. Right? That first 12-hour response can be a hot mess if you don't know where you need to focus, right? And that's partly where that's a good cyber threat intel person can say.
And that's not a good mess to have, a hot mess.
No, that's probably amongst the worst kind of messes out there. I think I would go that far. Yeah.
But so it's somewhat. So you're talking intel. You've just bridged it over to cybersecurity, then brought it back to intel. Where are you seeing right now are the real gaps that are needed out there? Or is it gaps in training? Is it gaps in uh, skill sets? Is it gaps in
Yeah.
education? Where are we at in
Uh,
that bridge?
yeah, I'm going to reiterate my earlier point and go a little bit deeper on the lack of early career cyber threat intelligence professionals.
Okay.
Um, because back to the limited resources, you only have so much money to spend on your workforce. Um, more established organizations need to develop their own internal pipelines for talent development and workforce development. And so there needs to be, right, and I think Mercer's is filling this in part, um, a pipeline of early career folks who understand both cyber threats, cyber threat pursuit, cyber threat hunting, uh, the basics of computer science, all of that, right? Coming in off the bat and can be dangerous in a seat day one, right?
So would you agree that the cyber threat hunters we have in the CRAT right now,
Mm-hmm.
and where we're doing that training, and the faculty are doing great with the Intel department and cybersecurity and understanding the need to cross pollinate and train. We put them on the watch.
Mm-hmm.
So our watch is like a typical government watch floor, a
Okay.
JSOC watch floor, or a GSOC in the
Mm-hmm.
private sector watch
Mm-hmm.
floor. Is, in your opinion, is that a good place for them to be in that proactive
Yeah.
tipping and queuing area, or should they be somewhere else?
No, I think that's where they need to be, right? Because one of the
Well, I'm glad you said
yeah,
that
no, one of
because
the
I
is
was
where we
like,
put them
oh,
already,
I'm
right?
wrong.
No, they should be somewhere else. They should be down the street. No, if their job is a little bit of a fusion, like a human fusion center, right? You have different
Yeah,
streams of intelligence coming in. You have the geopolitical stuff, which clearly matters because it's happening in Iran right now,
and that's where our watch.
right?
It's on our watch. Yeah.
Yeah, right now there are industrial control system threat notifications that went out from FBI and CISA in the last 48 hours saying, hey, there's industrial control systems at risk to cyber threat actors from Iran. Right now we're seeing this happen. Um, you have to be in tune to, this is an easy one. Obviously, Iran, we're at war. That's an easy one not to miss. But you have to be in
We're
tune
supposed to be in
to
a ceasefire, though,
a
aren't we?
ceasefire. Yeah, supposedly we're ceasefired and
Somebody
we're
tell
we're all
Israel.
good, right? Yeah, it's so yeah, they need to have that and have that situational awareness, right? Because that matters. If we want to pull the thread though on the inconvenient side of this, there's still a lot of leaders in the broader chief information officer's office, if you will, who did not grow up with cyber threat as part of their portfolio.
I think that's a great point you just made.
Right.
That is the one of the roadblocks, right? Is do you have enough knowledge or understanding or are comfortable enough to address moving forward with that with what today's threat environment
Mm-hmm.
is? It's no longer the guy that can trying to get in the door with the key card, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's changed.
digital
Yeah, and so
through
if
servers.
you're a chief information officer, your career has gone probably lots of different directions to get there at this point. And you're probably towards the latter stages of your career. There's always some younger folks out there doing it, but to actually have an appreciation for where this aspect of that broader career field is going is necessary to make this work. Because you could hire a cyber threat intel analyst group for your company and not use them adequately, and then wonder why did I just waste all of this cash? I'm not getting anything beneficial out of it.
If I had to ask you, what
Yeah.
is one of the biggest pitfalls or shortfalls of vulnerabilities for companies right now on the cybersecurity side of it, what would you say?
AI has made social engineering so much more effective than it was even a year ago. Humans are still the weakest link in any
So let's
cybersecurity
talk about
defense.
that. Let's
Yeah,
talk about AI and new
yeah,
technologies,
hmm
how that's affecting the field
yeah,
when it comes to intelligence in general. It doesn't have to be necessarily
hmm
straight cybersecurity
hmm
related, but yeah, let's go down that road.
yeah. So the kind of pull on the social engineering thing for a moment as a bedrock for how AI is just changing things. For a long time we relied on your employees of whether you're a government agency or a private company reading an email and saying, hey, the verbiage in this, the grammar seems off. The verbiage is wrong for this industry. Something doesn't feel right. It's your Nigerian whatever
Yeah,
scam.
those guys
That's,
always get me.
yep.
I've yet to receive my
Yeah,
$2
your
billion
$2 billion
dollars.
you haven't inherited from a prince.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
right. So that
crazy to
was that
me.
was the easy way to do that through form letters, and people caught on. And AI enables anyone to be both a proficient English speaker if you're targeting Western countries, but then also tailor the content of a message to match an industry, and with a little bit of extra work and social media mining, match it to the recipient, right? With minimal amount of work.
And that's a great point.
Yeah.
There's some inconvenient intelligence right there,
Yeah.
right? The cybersecurity protocols that you had in place even 2 years ago, a year ago, have been beat now by AI.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to be the smartest person to outsmart your security guys or your protocols you have in place, even the standards that you have in place, because AI can do it for you now.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas a lot of places that people are getting their information to build those policies and those
Mm-hmm.
protocols from, they're getting it from big data anyways, and some of them are probably using AI. So it's all coming back together there, and
not to make this like an overly
that's the
complicated,
inconvenient intelligence.
overly complicated sort of conversation, but now you need to think about what are the countermeasures to that. So if you're building a system that can disrupt an AI-enabled offensive system, what does that look like? Or if you're going to assume that you have data stolen, right? That's going to happen. How do you disrupt the data that's stolen in a way that's it's harder to exploit? I think the future of data exfil is you send in a large language model, it learns things on your computer network, and then you exfil much smaller bits of data instead of exfilling thousands of documents, right? You can summarize whatever it is you need and exfil much
Instead
smaller.
of the fire hose, you're doing it with the drip method.
And it's harder to catch because you have less data leaving, you have a bunch of documents flowing out of your system. You can encrypt that signal, that makes it easy. Right? So there's this weird situation now where say, okay, well then do I somehow seed my data with false or wrong or misleading information on the assumption it will be stolen at some point and it will be less useful to the adversary. And this doesn't really apply to like a ransomware.
Now you're talking counter intel.
But now we're getting into more advanced sort of counter cyber espionage operations, especially for companies or organizations that deal with sensitive proprietary information, where they're really the focus of that IP, that focus of that operational intel, whatever. Keeping that safe is about.
And how many people? I mean, how many companies out there have a counter espionage team inside their GSOC? How many of them have a counter espionage team inside their, cybersecurity? How many? To me, that is one of those. I don't understand it, so I don't need it.
Yeah.
Right? Type. And this goes to, I think, just as important as cybersecurity, just as important as your intel analyst, is the counter espionage or the counter intelligence side of it, corporate espionage side of it, having those that can counter it.
Yeah. I think the number of companies on the private sector side that have built, we'll call it mature counterintelligence programs, counterintelligence being the bigger umbrella, perhaps including counterespionage, some cyber threat fusion, insider threat, which is again part of that, probably some component of their traditional security investigations, because security investigations are often the sort of initial indicator that something's going on, right? That a security investigation sheds light on something that becomes an insider threat problem, which could be related to counterespionage, right? As you keep pulling those threads, you don't know, and you have to run it down each time, and the chance of it's slim, but it's a black swan event, right? The repercussions are significant.
They're huge.
Yeah, unlikely, but highly problematic if it occurs. So in my dealing with other companies in our industry, and Draper's a research and development lab, right? So we do.
So you are a target.
Yeah, we are.
R&D is a target.
Yeah, we have 5 major initiatives at Draper that we work at, and if you look at publicly stated, just stay with China for a second, publicly stated Chinese domestic S&T development goals, it's not a Venn diagram overlap. It's like a perfect circular overlap between the two. So we know that we're being targeted routinely, right? We do what they need.
You're talking one. So this is the part in the podcast where we try to throw out some slight on China.
Yeah.
So we always try to throw that in there. That's like our bumper sticker of the thing. So throwing out there on China right now, we know you're doing spying on soft targets. We know you're spying on public sector, but we also know you're in the private sector.
Yeah.
We know China, you're not as slick as you think you are. And this guys that like this with counter espionage experience that are out there, they will get you. So just stop.
Yeah.
Stay at home. Stay at home. Kick back.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So how we do this, we can pull a thread on China, right, and make this inconvenient. Um, when you look at indicators of espionage over time, and lots of the FBI has published a fair amount of data on what the average person who commits espionage in the United States looks like, right? And there are certain things that are highly correlated and certain things that aren't. And when you work in academia and in research development, and those two are closely tied together, we're going to have a sizable number of Asian Americans who work in our facility. And we have this conversation often, right? And it's uncomfortable. We have to have an uncomfortable conversation with our employees because ethnicity is not an indicator of committing espionage.
Absolutely
Citizenship is a very strong indicator of who commits espionage. So if you look at the last 25 years and the citizenship of those who are arrested for espionage in the United States, it's a laundry list of China, Russia, Iran. It's who you would expect to see on there. There are a few Americans, of course, right?
I mean, I think
or
people,
American citizens are doing it, but by and large, this is something done by foreign nationals.
and that might be the inconvenient intelligence for some people out there is just because somebody's Asian American or just because they're Muslim or whatever, they can still be United States citizens. They're still Americans. They're not the ones we're necessarily worried about. The conspiracy that there's all these sleeper cells out there, look, that's a conspiracy, all right?
Yeah.
But you brought up a great point. Those that have come directly here on a visa, they still have their citizenship back in some of these countries. Yep. They are really good. I have to give China props. They're really good at espionage. Russia. They're the ones we should be throwing up the red flag about and looking into. It doesn't mean they're bad.
Yeah.
But those are the ones we should be putting our effort into. Do you agree, disagree?
No, yeah.
Good, bad, and ugly on it?
But both, all of the above. It's easy to characterize the way China steals information or intelligence as sort of there's a long-time stereotype that it's unprofessional and they rely on academia, they rely on students. What the intelligence community for a long time is called non-traditional collectors, versus card-carrying intelligence case officers who sneak into a country and recruit specific individuals to commit espionage. Right.
That's the human side.
Yeah. This is, instead of going that direction, you incentivize your academics and your students studying abroad to return back to China and transfer what they've learned right back to the state. It's false to say that China only does that. Yes, they are very good at using that non-traditional collectors, but they also run an incredibly sophisticated intelligence community with state-of-the-art signals intelligence.
Well, it goes back to the cybersecurity that we were talking about earlier.
There's the cyber; they're fantastic. So
they are.
It's easy to say, yeah, we're just going to protect this from students or foreign professors, and that's just unfortunately not the way it is anymore. That's changed. Go back. I'm going to make this number up. 25 years. Sure, the primary threat was probably the primary threat was probably non-traditional collectors.
Right.
But that's changed dramatically. It's them and, right? It's not a replacement. It's not like they gave up non-traditional collection in turn for a modern espionage program. No, they've got non-traditional collectors and
technology
and the technology and the signals intelligence and the stuff in space and the imagery.
Oh, you brought up space. All that space stuff, is a whole nother frontier.
All that's now on the table. And working in R&D with a lot of university partnerships, we have to do a lot of due diligence, right? Who are we doing that work with?
Because that's the soft target, right?
It is.
You can come to Mercyhurst University, not that this is happening,
yeah.
But if I want to get somebody into Draper Labs, and I know Draper Labs is hiring for Mercyhurst University, I'm going to try to get somebody into the university knowing that that's a soft target for me to develop their credentials to get them into Draper, or vice versa, it's a soft target for them to be able to come here and start sourcing some of the students that may end up in those positions somewhere. But how do they find them? They don't have to come create these big dossiers and spend 2 years cultivating a source. they can find all the information they need through cyber means, through big data,
Yeah.
and already know that person when they hit the ground and speed up that timeline. You make great points on that.
Yeah, and so we do a lot of due diligence. We focus on that highly, on who we partner with, who we work with, and that extends not just from like our academic partners, but who we buy things from.
So before we transition to our last point of the podcast we want to talk about, I think there's an inconvenient intelligence point to point out here, and that's we've touched on two major things that can make your company vulnerable, and that's proactiveness in your cybersecurity by pursuing it or cyber threat hunting. And we've pointed out the fact that counter espionage, right? You've got to have a counter intel type of capability
I think so.
inside your company or your agency. And you can do it. You said less, we've got to do it with the minimal resources we have. AI is a way to do that. The inconvenient intelligence is if you're not embracing AI, AI is going to be your downfall.
Yeah.
On the other side, the inconvenient intelligence is if you strictly count on AI and take the human out of the loop, you're going to fail as well. Misinformation, disinformation, and somebody's always got to curate and vet that information, especially before it gets to a decision maker. So we've got two sides of the coin on this inconvenient intelligence, but your last point you made was that kind of triangulation between academia, industry, and government, how they have to come together to be the real solution. Can you elaborate on your thought process on that?
Yeah. So, I think we need to back it up a notch and look at what we consider to be part of national security.
Sure.
And for a long time, I think in the United States, we kept national security somewhat separate from economic security. I think that's probably the wrong way to think about it. And I think the government, U.S. government, has kind of moved away from that, right? That the two are now deeply interconnected. That you can't talk about national security without economic security. And the tools that you use to mitigate threats to either of those are.
I mean, we're seeing that now. Look what's happening right now. National security is affecting the supply chain. It's affecting the price of gas. It's the Strait of Hormuz is closed because of national security to stop the nuclear.
And commercial supply chains right now become a touch point for global conflict. Sure, there's always going to be wars fought over belief structures. Like that's not going to go away. But access to the raw materials necessary to keep modern lives modern is increasingly going to be like a strategic hot point here. And so thinking about academia as a strategic resource, thinking just alongside rare earth elements and anything else, right? I think that's probably how you blend that all together. And you need to invest in protecting the intellectual property that's developed there, while also maintaining free and open research in academia and sharing information. And that's what makes great universities great universities. But that's a problem in the United States. I think that being of inconvenient intelligence, if you look at a list of the top 10 universities in the world and compare it year to year over the last 20 years, you're going to see U.S. universities dropping off.
Especially in the R&D field.
Yeah, that's changing.
Now, is that a fault of the university, in your opinion, or your experience? Is it a fault of the government for not funding more R&D sites? Is it a combination? What do you really think, in your opinion, is the root cause of this?
So, like a lot of things in the world, it's complicated. As the inconvenient answer.
There's the inconvenient.
There is. So it's certainly not helped any when you have dramatic cuts in federal funding for basic and applied research, right? And that drives smart students elsewhere. That drives post-grad researchers elsewhere outside the United States.
Correct.
And you quickly see opportunity in Western Europe and China to step in and say, hey, we're willing to fund the research that the U.S. is no longer funding. And I personally believe that the return on investment for funding basic research is massive, right?
Well, where's the private sector hold responsibility in this as well? Because it can't just always...
No, and that's
what we do for the government goes into the government, right?
So this is complicated.
Where's the private sector fall in?
And so this is a number that I don't have off the top of my head, but I know
Don't worry, we'll get it.
we'll have someone look for it.
Connor will get it.
There are smart people who look very closely at domestic industrial R&D spending comparing nations. And I know that the US historically has outspent everybody by a sizable margin in company-led research and development. So
like Draper,
but even like big guys like Apple and General Motors and Ford and Boeing, right, spend a lot of money doing that. And so sometimes we start comparing research and development budgets country to country. It's misleading to look only at their federal government spending because it's not taking that into consideration.
And how about also looking at, that's a great point, but they're doing it internally in their own R&D.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking university R&D as part of that. Do they have a responsibility, or would it be in their best interest? I won't say responsibility, but are they missing the boat on not investing more in R&D at the university levels? I mean, I see, and we have clients that do that, so it's not everybody in the private sector, but the ability to invest in that, get the R&D going at a university, and then be a pipeline of feeders from those that have worked on those projects to come in and go to work at those companies as program managers, as the engineers, as all of that, because they're going to graduate and go somewhere.
Yeah.
Why not come to you, and why not train them so you have a fully trained employee on day one?
So I'm biased on this because at Draper we run,
which is what the CRAD is, by the way.
Yeah, we run a very successful academic program called Draper Scholars, where we've got a mix of graduate and post-grad students who are doing research in areas of interest to Draper. We fund them.
Which is smart.
It's a prestigious grant to receive. And our hopes is that some of that technology gets transferred over to Draper, and we may pull that into classified work or more applied things. We hire some proportion of the people who graduate from that program wherever they're actually at school. And so that's been incredibly fruitful. We have tech that we are deploying today in classified environments that is based off of someone's PhD thesis research. We need that, right? We can't fund all of that ourselves. We need to leverage the great research universities that are out there. Break. We also know that's a big vulnerability for us, right? That we have Draper scholars who have in the past worked for professors who've then gone over and traded information to China. We know that there's a flow of information, right?
The inconvenient intelligence side of it.
There's a risk to it. We like to think that we can mitigate that. We have good diligence processes. We have good defensive counterintelligence, all those sorts of things, that we make it worthwhile to continue that investment in the scholars program, because we can mitigate those threats. Not everyone can do that, right? Not everyone thinks about the same way that our organization does.
Hopefully this podcast will help a lot of people start to think that way.
It.
So let me bring it back then.
Yeah.
You had mentioned something about to us prior to the podcast about the triangle of communication to generate some solutions or a better way to use everything we've talked about, whether it's academia, private sector, or government. Can you elaborate on your triangle idea?
Yeah, so national security takes cooperation and coordination across the private sector, the public sector, and I think academia as part of that, especially when it comes to the broader mission of technology protection, which is kind of been my career focus, largely in the idea of how do we protect the research and development that we've invested so heavily into, but also technology writ large. Supply chain security is a big part of that. How do we prevent the sabotage, subversion, or exploitation of our systems through our supply chains? How do we worry about the economic sabotage of the companies that we rely on for key products and components, which could have an effect on the sanctity of a system at the end, right? If a company gets bought out or goes bankrupt before we get the parts we need, right, that can cause an issue with our own supply chain resiliency, right? So how do we think about that in a modern world is really a challenge. And there's always sort of been this implicit agreement between at least government and private sector that the government will take care of some of those big strategic supply chain issues that no individual company can manage. For example, securing rights to rare earth elements
things that are
or helium.
maybe too big to fail or need a lot of good regulation.
Yeah, so like, Taiwan makes a lot of the world's semiconductors. Right? That's not news. Part of making a semiconductor, the requirements are having lots of helium, and there's only so many sources of helium in the world. You can mine it; it comes out of the ground. Some of that in Texas, I believe, and we've got pretty large helium stores here in the U.S. It's also the byproduct of liquid natural gas production, which we do a lot of here too. So we've got plenty of helium. Also happens in the Middle East on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz. We don't export our helium in mass. The Middle East does. Taiwan is dependent on that Middle East helium for semiconductor manufacturing.
Which is kind of odd because we need the semiconductors.
And we need the semiconductors.
We're the biggest importer of semiconductors, but we're not exporting the chemical they need for it.
We export design files. They're designed here, and that's actually one of our U.S.'s largest exports is semiconductor design files.
Yep.
But we don't,
because even the testing and packaging is done in Taiwan.
Yep, so we import.
We don't even have those here, and that's what's crazy.
Small amount of that. And so the government's job, in part, should be to help, secure that complex supply chain.
Right.
I don't know if that's part of the calculus right now, for example, with the Strait of Hormuz. It should be. So I think there's sort of a breakdown of that implicit trust that the large strategic supply chain stuff that no one company can fix is being taken care of. But private industry doesn't get off scot-free either. There needs to be an effort on their part to say, okay, how do we mitigate or manage the vulnerabilities in our supply chain so that we are resilient in traditional logistician's standpoint, but also so we're not delivering compromised products to our customers, whether that be an end consumer, a compromised product like the threat or the scare right now on routers being compromised that are made overseas.
Especially Hawaii technology.
Yeah, you have Huawei and all those
Huawei,
folks.
there you go. Huawei.
But I think the president just signed an executive order or something similar saying, hey, no more foreign manufactured commercial routers.
Right, but the parts for them all are still.
It's how you actually would ever pull it off is beyond me, right?
Hello, everyone. Fact checker Connor here. What Mike Lyden refers to is President Trump's directive, which states that he would like to reduce the use of foreign technology, in this case, consumer-grade routers, for national security purposes. The Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, has upheld President Trump's directive and stated that even routers that are made outside, with partial parts made outside of the U.S., are still deemed as unnecessary and unapproved unless the DoD or DHS says otherwise. With that, back to the podcast.
So I think what you're saying is we've got a triangle here of responsibility.
We do.
And the government and private sector really need to be communicating with academia to help
figure out some of those tough problems.
Find some of those solutions to those tough problems.
But then academia also needs to do their part too and say, okay, we need to protect our own IP. We have to be wary and cognizant.
That is a great point because
there's a risk.
That's that trust factor because there is a risk factor to that. And, we have a solution for it here at Mercy Earth. We're lucky to have a solution here for it. And it's because we have great partners, we have great faculty, and we have trust from our administration, the CRAT, right? And if we keep mentioning the CRAT, if you go to mucirat.com, you can see what we're talking about. You can see how we are trying to be part of this triangle. And then you also see the great partners that we have from government and academia, government and private sector that are working and partnering with us. They're listed on our site as those that are helping us out and providing those projects, but they're ahead of their competitors, right? They're beating their competitors because they understand your triangle. They understand how it all works, and they understand that these students are seeing private sector, government, non-governmental organizations, law enforcement, R&D. They're seeing it all, which also gives them a very unique perspective on finding those solutions. And so I'm glad to, this triangle method, this triangle of communication is brilliant. And it is the solution to the toughest problems. And you brought up a great point earlier about how this can put us behind, right? Other countries that are doing this, how it's going to put us behind on that. So I would like to turn it over to you. We've talked about a lot of great things, high level, gotten in the weeds.
Yeah.
This has been amazing to have you, Mike, and I really
appreciate it.
appreciate you imparting your wisdom, because you're out there doing it. You're on boots on the ground. You're involved in this. You're seeing it. You're not just reading it in a book and then regurgitating it. So your personal experience has been instrumental to our success of this episode. What would you like to leave our listeners with, or what wisdom would you like to impart in general on the topics we've talked about that maybe we didn't fully touch on that you want to?
So I think one of the great things about learning intelligence at Mercyhurst from a tradecraft perspective is this concept, and maybe it's inherent in a traditional liberal arts education at large, but how you think versus what you think. And how you think really, really matters. The world's a complex place. We've talked a lot about that complexity today. And positioning yourself to operate in a complex environment is hard. And now you're asked to forecast or do estimative intelligence in that complex world is really, really hard. And there's a couple ways you can get around to doing this, right? Through applying appropriate tradecraft, which we is taught here at this institution. Another aspect of this, and this is what I worry about writ large, is making sure that we are looking for and promoting intellectual curiosity amongst our students and our early career and full career folks working in intelligence. There's a gentleman named Philip Tetlock. He's a researcher in the area of cognitive bias. And he's famous for doing these long-term studies where they were measuring the accuracy of predictions made by professionals, subject matter experts, and people who are simply well-read and well-rounded. And started off by studying people on television, talking heads. And it turned out that they were about 50% accurate in the predictions they made.
I think my crew here would probably say I'm about that as well.
Yeah. And then you've got, us talking heads for the day, right? And then you've got folks who are just the well-read, responding to the same questions and predicting out, and they turn out to be more accurate than the experts were. And that gave pause to the intelligence community and others thinking about, well, how are we doing this? We're doing this the right way. Is subject matter expertise versus how, analytic tradecraft, what's the right balance and answer here? And it turns out that we're really bad still, I think, in the intelligence community, private, public sector, you name it, at really promoting this concept of being well-read, applying good tradecraft, and limiting cognitive bias.
There's some inconvenient intelligence for you right there, cognitive bias.
And I think the easiest way to solve this, right, is simply to follow up and track our accuracy. If I make a prediction, hold me accountable, go back and check it in a year. I can learn from my mistakes. I can learn to see where I fell short. We don't do that. I don't know of any organizations that, as a matter of course, have really good reflect on their analytic judgments.
In the military, we call it after action review.
Yeah. And it may happen like right after. I want to go out a couple of years after you've made this big strategic.
So you want to do it on a much grander scale.
I want to figure out what we're getting wrong and why.
I would love to do a study like that. That would be great.
And some folks back to Philip Tetlock and his friends, they've studied that. And there's a concept called super forecasters, and looking at individuals who are really accurate in making these predictions. And I think there's lessons to be learned in stealing from those concepts and improving our own tradecraft, whether it's counterintelligence or counterespionage work or big strategic national security issues like, what will be happening in Palestine 3 to 5 years from now, right? Those big picture things. We're falling flat on this one a little bit.
That is deep and amazing, and that has actually got my brain turning in the way of, I think you may have given us a couple new ideas for some future podcasts with cognitive bias and looking at things from that perspective of not necessarily right and wrong, but looking at it from what lessons were learned. Do we learn the lessons?
Yeah.
But you've given us a lot to think about.
We've got a lot of ground today.
And I know we're going to keep Connor busy.
Yeah.
But speaking of which, I'd really like to give thanks to Mike for being here,
Happy to do it.
co-hosting with me. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say thank you to my crew, our executive producer, Katie Nelson, our producer or director, all-around communications and media guy. All right, Dylan, thank you, Dylan Stritzinger. All right, I know everybody's waiting for me to butcher his last name as usual, but I've been practicing. And of course, we can't leave out our intern, fact checker, gopher, you name it. Our great does the intelligence reports for us, Connor Clark. So thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Without them, this would not be possible. Yeah. They do a great job behind the scenes. And thank you to all of our listeners. I hope you learned something from this, as I always say. I hope we gave you something to sound smarter around the water cooler with, something to kick around the office, something to throw around the living room talking with your family, or something that maybe, as we said, those talking heads on TV, maybe we made you a little smarter on whether or not to believe them or not. As always, thank you, and have a great rest of your time until our next podcast.